Okay. Today I'm honored to welcome James Valliant to the show. James is a former prosecutor and author known for his deep and fearless work as a leading objectivist thinker. His work spans ethics, political philosophy, and the intersection of religion and reason. He is the author of The Passion of Ayn Rand Critics and the co-creator of the book and the film Creating Christ. Highly recommended, which explores the thesis that Christianity's origins are tied to a Roman political agenda. James brings a passionate, rare, and powerful perspective to the crossroads of ideas, history, and culture. James, it's a real pleasure to have you here. Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me. Wow, what a wonderful introduction. Thank you. I hope I live up to your kind words.
Easily, and of course. My goal for this conversation, with your kind help and vast knowledge, is to take the listeners and myself on a journey to build a clear, systematic structure of objective philosophy. So, with your permission, we will start from the very foundation, metaphysics, and move to epistemology, ethics, and if time allows, even touch on art and beauty. Along the way, I would love for you to contrast objectivism with the major philosophies and religion that stand in opposition to reason and life. So, if I may, let's begin with the first question. In objectivism, metaphysics is the foundation of philosophy, identifying the nature of reality itself. Could you explain how objectivism metaphysical position that reality is objective, absolute, and independent of consciousness differs fundamentally from other major schools of thought like Kant, Plato, Heraclitus' philosophy of the flux, and as I do understand that Ayn Rand warned that adopting ethical or political ideas without a sound metaphysical foundation is dangerous. So I would like to hear your opinion, please.
Well, the subject of metaphysics is the foundation for all knowledge, for anything else we know. And we develop our understanding of metaphysics at a very, very early age. And that understanding actually is, whether people recognize it or not, is the foundation for all subsequent knowledge. As adults, we can contradict the things that we learned as a child. Let me give you just one example. There's the classic example of a small child, a toddler or a baby. They see something unpleasant that they don't like, and so they cover their eyes up, and then they open up their eyes and they realize that did not make the unpleasant reality go away, did it?
Yes.
That's one of our very first lessons in what Ayn Rand called the primacy of existence, which just demonstrates the relationship between existence and consciousness. My consciousness doesn't control reality. Evading the facts won't change the facts. My consciousness must conform to reality. As the great English philosopher Francis Bacon said, nature to be commanded must be obeyed. The metaphysics of Ayn Rand, objectivism, begins by saying there is a reality independent of consciousness, and that it's up to consciousness to know it. So we must submit to the facts of reality, which are absolute and independent of our consciousness. Most philosophies in the history of philosophy have been not what Ayn Rand would call the primacy of existence, which you can see in Aristotle to at least a large degree, and most consistently, it's Ayn Rand who really brought it to its full consistent expression. This concept of the primacy of existence over consciousness. Most other philosophies are a form of what Ayn Rand called the primacy of consciousness. In the contemporary world, we have subjectivists who think that their feelings make things so, and that everything is subjective, and that everything's a matter of opinion, and that there is no truth, and that words are just arbitrary conveniences. Ayn Rand rejects that altogether. But there are other forms of the primacy of consciousness. Primacy of my consciousness, one could call it first person subjectivism, which so many contemporary philosophers hold. But there's other forms of the primacy of consciousness. And in this, I would include, for example, the very concept of God or gods, as if there's some kind of ruling consciousness. People can't imagine an existence existing independently of any consciousness whatever. And so primitive human beings projected their consciousness onto the universe. That there is a purpose, there's an intelligence, there's a plan behind the entire universe. Well, that's the primacy of consciousness, you see, writ large metaphysically. But and some people have a collective view of it, well, maybe not my consciousness, and maybe it's not God's consciousness that rules. It's the consciousness of the majority of the people. The idea that a million Frenchmen can't be wrong. No, you can't determine truth by opinion poll either. It's not a question of how many people believe it. It's not a question of how emotionally committed you are to it. It's not a question of trying to figure out by divine revelation or ancient text or some burning bush or some revelation of St. Paul what God's consciousness is all about. No, this is why we need to connect it to metaphysics, to what we call epistemology, which is the theory of knowledge, which is why we need a specific method that is based on the facts and fact focused. And that's what logic is. My senses get me, just because an idea pops into my head, ghost, unicorn, magical elf, that does not oblige reality to contain magical elves or unicorns, does it? I have got to connect what's in my head to the facts of reality by a process of proof. I need an objective methodology. I know causally, there's no causeless magical knowledge any more than there's a causeless action of any kind. And so I know how my senses connect me to reality. And but I'm not just a being of sense perception like certain animals are. They just simply react based on their sense perception of reality. We are, as human beings, we are conceptual beings. We have highly abstract ideas. And so as I develop my conceptual knowledge, my ideology, if you will, my ideas that can penetrate well beyond sense perception. And with our amazing conceptual faculty, look at what science can do. It can penetrate into the invisible, the very small, the invisibly small, and into the grand perspective of the universe. To achieve that kind of knowledge, I need to stay connected to reality. And the only method I have for doing that is logic. Because logic is based on another important metaphysical fact, that things are what they are, independent of our consciousness. Yeah. And that they, as Ayn Rand puts it, existence is identity. To be is to be something in particular. And the thing cannot be its opposite at the same time and in the same respect as the ancient Greek philosopher Aristotle said. And that was the foundation of his entire discovery of logic. People were using logic long before Aristotle, but accidentally. Aristotle developed the art of remaining consistent, the art of remaining connected to reality. So I need my senses to connect me to reality, and I need logic to keep me connected to reality, no matter how abstract my thinking. So Ayn Rand would say her metaphysics was a metaphysics of objective reality, that there's an independent objective reality, that things are what they are, that the universe is knowable, but it's only knowable by a specific method, the method of reason. That is, the method of adhering to the senses and integrating the material of the senses by means of logic.
Incredible. So basically, the axiom is that existence exists, the law of identity, A is A, and all the rest of it. That's the foundation for everything, right?
Exactly.
Knowledge has to be based and aligned to that.
Exactly. As I say, when we're children, we learn covering my eyes doesn't make an unpleasant reality go away, does it? And every time I make a mistake, I'm reminded of the fact that my consciousness is not the creator of reality, not the dictator of the universe. My mind must submit to reality, and I've got to adhere self-consciously to a method, systematically and consistently adhere to a method that keeps me connected to reality, logic.
Mm-hmm. You already touched a little about the epistemological principles, but I would like to go deeper. So, Objectivism offers a unique solution to the question of knowledge. Could you summarize its core epistemological principles, like what you said about reason and concepts and how we create them, and kindly contrast them, which is very important for me, with other ways of knowing, like mysticism, revelation, skepticism, intrinsic subjectivism, or even emotionalism, which in my view are potentially the destroyer of knowledge. It would be great if you could also give specific example of how each one of those ways of knowing can ultimately lead to tyranny and the destruction of the individual rights. So if you can package it for my audience. And
Well, epistemologically, Ayn Rand believed that beyond the level of sense perception, there is only one way we can know. Consciousness is although a consciousness is not the creator of reality, consciousness is our means of knowing reality. But like everything else that exists, it too has a nature. The law of identity and the law of non-contradiction apply to consciousness. And this is one of the it's really hard for people to grasp that it was only in the 20th century with Ayn Rand that we had a philosopher who consistently understood this basic fact. Consciousness has an identity, and that identity has to be adhered to if we want to know. So I've got to attend to the observation, the facts. It was the scientific revolution that put observation at the center of knowing. But observation in itself won't get me to conceptual knowledge, to what we call propositional logic or scientific theories or theories about history, where all of our real knowledge is contained, is at the conceptual abstract level. She defines reason as the faculty that integrates the material provided by and identifies the material provided by man's senses. And so we cannot just arbitrarily use any old method, because that would be a violation of the nature of consciousness. If I attempted to use a horoscope, an astrology, to figure something out, if I attempted to use, Indian tea leaf reading or a Ouija board, those are the old Ouija boards that would get you in contact with the spirit realm. Those I cannot see how those connect me to reality. I do not. They're actually a pseudo means. It's a recognition that knowledge has to happen somehow, but look, a horoscope and a Ouija board are not going to connect you to reality. That's what I call mysticism, and what Ayn Rand called mysticism, an attempt to gain knowledge by some means other than reason, other than connecting us to reality and staying consistent with reality, which is what observation and logic do. If you have some non-rational mean, if you claim to have some non-rational means of knowledge, we can call you a mystic. And it really doesn't matter what that other pseudo method of knowing is, whether it's divine revelations like St. Paul claimed to have in the New Testament, or any other mystic in history, or studying your horoscope, or any of these other pseudo means. That's sheer mysticism. And interestingly, very often in history, what's juxtaposed are the dogmatic certainties of the mystics, who get it by by means of revelation or something. Moses at a burning bush, he hears the voice of God. It doesn't really matter what that method is, pseudo method is. That it will always yield them dogmatic, absolute certainty outside of any context of facts, outside of any context of application. It's absolute certainty that they claim to have through this pseudo means of knowledge. And so is normally contrasted with skepticism. Since time immemorial, since the pre-Socratic ancient Greeks, there were people who believed that knowledge was impossible, that people could not really know reality at all. And their normal argument was that consciousness had an identity. Look, we only have our senses. Our senses give us a limited perspective on things. I see things through means of color and shape, and therefore I'm not seeing reality directly. I'm only seeing reality as my consciousness presents it to me. Well, Ayn Rand said, that's like saying I'm blind because I have eyes, deaf because I have ears,
yes,
ignorant, deluded because I have a mind, and I need to use logic. No, consciousness possesses an identity, and that identity must be adhered to. And recognizing that fact refutes both mysticism, which gives us these pseudo methods of knowing. It's not recognizing the correct nature of consciousness and the specific means that consciousness must operate by, and recognizing the fact that consciousness possesses identity is the argument against is what the skeptics aren't recognizing. They're damning consciousness for possessing an identity, for not giving us an ultimate revelation of certain knowledge automatically. And so if knowledge is not, if I'm not omnipotent in a single glance, by no means, then the skeptic is not happy. Well, you see, your knowledge is just partial or limited, and we may have to develop a wider context as we learn more and more. No, that's the way reason works. It doesn't mean that my knowledge is can't be certain. I can be certain within the context of what I know, but we're not infallible. We're not omniscient. It takes a specific method to know. And the recognition of the fact that consciousness possesses an identity is actually the refutation of all the major arguments of either these mystics who claim dogmatic certainty or these skeptics who claim that we can never know anything. Well, because we have eyes, because we have to go by logic.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would contrast it, and these ideas, you get dominated Western thinking. And this false alternative dominated Western thinking through most of modern history. You notice the primacy of consciousness in the famous French philosopher who's often called the father of modern philosophy, René Descartes.
Yeah.
He said, I think, therefore I am. Oh, wait a minute. You have to exist. Stuff has to exist out there, or consciousness is not possible. Consciousness is an inherently relational idea. If there's nothing for me to know, I can't be conscious. In fact, I can't even isolate what consciousness means without the idea of there being something I'm conscious of. Consciousness presupposes a reality that I'm conscious of. So René Descartes started Western philosophy in the 17th century, at least modern philosophy in the 17th century, with the primacy of consciousness. Now, he was, in a roundabout way, trying to prove the existence of God and make that somehow consistent with the scientific revolution that was going on in Europe at the time. Well, that can't be done. And so the mistakes that modern philosophy started out with led them inevitably to a philosopher like David Hume, who was an advocate of outright skepticism. Really, he made these arguments. Yeah, so human beings really can't know anything. Perhaps I can, this green here now that flashes by is all I can identify. He did not believe concepts could be objective. He did not understand the nature of concepts. And then, of course, there's Immanuel Kant, who was awakened by David Hume from his dogmatic slumbers. And Kant said, well, the way we see reality in terms of entities, objects out there, in terms of causation out there, that's all a product of the human mind. You see, again, the primacy of consciousness. We impose whatever order there is on the universe. Whatever truths we claim to know are not the product of facts of reality as integrated by human mind attending to the method that it must attend to. It is the direct product of consciousness itself. We are in effect blind because we have eyes. It was a specific critique of Kant. And in the wake of Kant, you have super subjectivists like Hegel, Nietzsche, you name it. And even the so-called materialists who claim to be scientific, like Karl Marx, they rejected logic in favor of polylogism. That's just bourgeois logic, because we all know that your knowledge is conditioned by the economic class into which you're born and raised. And these people are rejecting reason as they're all mystics or neo-mystics in one sense, or all skeptics. And they're two sides really of the same coin. You'll notice how arguments for a religion, arguments for mysticism always begin by saying how limited human consciousness is. Well, that's in the nature of consciousness. Consciousness is necessarily limited, like anything else that exists. There is no, as I say, omniscience and infallibility and some means by which we can avoid the actual means that are necessary. But look at what we actually can know. We can split invisible atoms to release the power of suns. We can alter molecules to create new living species. We can go to the moon and shoot golf balls on the moon. The power of reason has been demonstrated again and again and again. But it is reason and only reason that can yield correct knowledge about reality.
Can you explain and define a little bit, for example, what is this intrinsicism? Sorry, I can't say it. Intrinsicism. Okay. Yeah. Something that has value in itself and doesn't have to do anything with the value we as people in a reason. We use our reason to give value to things, but this term is basically saying that something has value of good or bad in itself. Can you please explain how they can use that to eventually manipulate or control people?
Well, if you've entered the realm now of values and ethics, which is the next major topic in the subject of, you see why philosophy is so important and all-embracing. It tells us that there's an objective reality independent of human consciousness, but it's up to human consciousness to figure that out by a specific method. And that's what epistemology tells us, how we know when it is we do know. And the next step in philosophy are basic value questions. What are values? Why do people need values? What's this whole phenomenon of value pursuit? And Ayn Rand distinctively, again, provides the remarkable answer. Value as a concept presupposes of answers to the questions of value to whom and for what. That's good for what? You know, I say when you get ill, take medicine. It's good for you. Or eat proper nutrition and get regular exercise. It's good for you in an objective way if we use life as the standard. And Ayn Rand identified life, the phenomenon of biology, the phenomenon of life itself is what gives rise to the entire concept of value. It is only to a living organism that something can be good for it or bad for it. I say, I have my house plant. As I say, sunlight and water, you know, and maybe some fertilizers are good for my plant in the sense that its life, those are the objective requirements of the life of that plant. And that's true for every living organism. It has a specific set of values because it has a specific set of needs, things that it is pursuing in order to achieve its life. So you can't speak of value apart from the phenomenon of life, according to Ayn Rand. Now, the unique thing about human beings is that unlike the other animals, we are, as I say, conceptual, abstract beings. So we are able to choose. In fact, we must choose the values that we pursue. And this gives us our enormous power of our creative mind, but it also presents a challenge. We can choose to be our own destroyers. We can choose to act in suicidal ways. You'll notice the mystics of the Middle Ages, the Christian Middle Ages in Europe, they would mortify the flesh. They would starve themselves. They would literally flagellate their backs bloody. They would take oaths of celibacy and poverty. They've inverted the purpose of value so that their values mean the destruction of life, because their only goal is to get into this supernatural dimension, to get into heaven and have some pleasant afterlife. And if that's what your goal is, not this life here in reality, then of course you've turned your values inside out and upside down, and you're now pursuing things that are bad for you on purpose. On purpose. And this minute that a mystic, and this is the connection here, the minute that a mystic posits a supernatural dimension, he's driven a wedge between the real and the ideal, between theory and practice. And so you'll hear people say, oh, well, that's good in theory, but it's not good in practice. Now, where would such an idea come? If it doesn't work in practice, how could it possibly be a good theory? Well, because they've got some supernatural dimension in mind. And so this world can never be perfect. We can never live up to true values. Values, actual values, are not within the reach of us, mortal human beings. And so the intrinsicist, to use get to the concept you're talking about, an intrinsicist about values believes that good and bad are intrinsic and have nothing to do with the needs of human life. That they drop the context of life on Earth, which is the only context that gives rise to the objective need to have values. And we have my needs, just as in medicine, so we can back up. If I build a bridge or if I cure a disease, life is the implicit standard of value and give me an objective understanding of what values are. But that life is what conditions what an objective value is. You see, if I drop the context of life on Earth, then my values have to come from somewhere. We have to pursue values of some kind. We're value pursuing living organisms. And so what we do is we relegate them to this mystic dimension. And so our values become what Ayn Rand calls intrinsic. And so you'll have philosophers, again, like Immanuel Kant, who will say, well, you have to tell the truth no matter what. And honesty is your duty. And it's a duty he gets from some mystic type argument. Literally. Now, it's not a crudely old-fashioned Christian argument. He has this argument about the categorical imperative, but it's still intrinsic values. And so it doesn't matter what the consequences are. And that's what Kant actually said. Ethics has nothing to do with the consequences. You do your duty regardless of the consequences. Now, wait a minute here. I'm in Nazi Germany, and I'm hiding Jews in the attic.
You
And
have
so the
to,
Nazis come
yeah,
along. Do you know any Jews?
of
I'm going
course.
to lie. I believe in honesty because I believe in adhering to reality. I'm never going to attempt to gain a value by means of deception. I'm never going to deceive myself. But there are circumstances in which I will attempt to deceive others. That's when someone is using force against me to deprive me of my values. So when the Nazi comes knocking at the door, I'm going to say, Jews? I don't know any Jews. What are you talking about? Go away. I will lie in the name of life for the same reason that I'm honest all the rest of the time on principle. That is the reason why, in this rare case, I'm going to lie directly. Think of it. Kant says, do your duty regardless of the consequences. Let me suggest that that is a Holocaust waiting to happen. German philosophers were teaching this notion of duty from Kant to Hegel to Marx to all the predecessors of Nazism. Were teaching duty, 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 regardless of consequences. Don't be surprised when an ocean of blood is spilled when that ethics takes hold, because it is hostile to life on earth by its very nature. Values you have to have an objective standard of values to understand what a proper value is, because humans have to choose their values, and reason is the only faculty for knowing, so it is our basic means of surviving. So reason has to be central, has to be, in fact, my pinnacle value. The correct apprehension of reality is my top value. Therefore, reason is my top moral value, and in Ayn Rand's ethics, her primary virtue. So the adherence to reason for Ayn Rand is a moral principle. And she is the first philosopher in all of Western history to make reason central. And all of her virtues in her ethics, honesty, integrity, productiveness, independence, all of them are the direct application of reason to the problem of survival. And so just as in medicine, life is the standard of value, so in ethics, by our nature, your nature as a human being, my nature as a human being, impose upon me the need to follow reason. And if I'm going to follow reason in a principled way, then I have to make honesty a principle. I have to make integrity a principle. Those are the applications of reason to the problem of survival. And therefore, honesty, productiveness, independence, integrity, even pride, Ayn Rand regarded as important virtues. There are other virtues that she regarded as important too, sort of subcategories of these, like courage and confidence. To survive, I need to foster and habituate these values, which are not intrinsic. Now, of course, you've got in contrast to intrinsicists, you've got, just as with in epistemology, you can contrast the mystics with the skeptics. So in ethics, you can contrast the ethical intrinsicists like Kant or the religious dogmatists of the past with these modern ethical subjectivists, men like Hume again, who said that it's just a question of feelings. He didn't know where emotions came from. He didn't understand that emotions are basically just a slave to the passions, as people often put it. So really, all of ethics, said Hume, is just a rationalization for people going by what they want to do, what their emotions tell them to do. Well, emotions are not the correct standard. Emotions are not a tool of cognition in epistemology. They're an important set of facts. I need to understand my own psychology. So I have to integrate the facts of my psychology just as I would integrate any other facts. But emotionalism and emotions themselves do not tell me anything about reality. They only tell me about my values, my habituated values. Ayn Rand understood, as modern cognitive psychology understands, that emotions are themselves the product of our evaluations that I may have made as a child, may be mostly subconscious, but evaluations that I've made. And so as my values have changed over the course of my life, so my emotions have changed. My emotions are simply telling me what it is I value. When I get angry, it's because I perceive an injustice. When I feel fear, it's one of my important values is being threatened. And so when you understand what your emotion is trying to tell you, what it's trying to say, it's the automatic physical result of the evaluations that you come to conceptually. And so emotions can't be the tool. But that's what our ethical subjectivists believe. So you've got the intrinsicists in ethics on one side and the subjectivists on the other side. Just as in epistemology, we have these mystics and on the other side, these skeptics. And in response to both of them, Ayn Rand developed her concept of objectivity. It is neither intrinsic nor values. Proper values are neither intrinsicist nor subjectivist, just as obtaining accurate knowledge cannot be done in any old means, like the mystics say, nor is knowledge impossible, like the skeptics say. Objectivity applies to knowledge in general, and the question of values is just a subcategory of knowledge. And so just as knowledge has to be objective, determined by an objective method of knowing, reason, so it is that values are a category of knowledge, you see, for human beings. Knowledge that I have to choose. I have to select the values that I'm going to go by.
So it's basically science, really.
It is
science
exactly
of ethics. It has to be based on the right metaphysics and the proper understanding of epistemology.
Correct. And philosophy is the subject that underlies all the rest of human knowledge. And you can see here, metaphysics, epistemology, and the basis and the foundations of ethics underlie everything else we know. And so it is an inescapable subject. I admire physicians, medical doctors. I admire physicists, but those aren't my areas of expertise. Those aren't. Nonetheless, I recognize objective knowledge in those areas. It is a matter of science. Philosophy is, you can't just dispense with philosophy. It is the ultimate science. It's the meta science that informs all the other sciences. I myself am a historian interested in philosophy, as you kindly described me, because, look, I can't know history unless I have an objective methodology, a correct approach to both knowledge and values, which has to inform how I go about studying history, for example. This is true of any science. Philosophy is the ultimate science, the science which tells us how we know, when we do know, and what our values ought to be if we're going to live and use values as properly as the means of obtaining life. And only using life as the standard can I acquire objective values. And you can see on questions this fundamental, they're inescapable in every science, but they are themselves, but philosophy itself, properly approached, is a science, yes.
When you build the proof for objective morality, why is it that of course, you have to begin with existence, and then obviously you can point out to the existence of human beings who actually own themselves, and there has to be an ability for them to fulfill the conditions for life, to prosper, to be able to use their mind and things like that. Why is it that the emphasis is not on self-ownership?
Well, you know, ownership is an interesting thing. I am not a ghost. I have a body. That body has certain needs, certain physical needs. And to understand the morality behind the need for ownership as such, I need value. I need to acquire. I need to gain and keep certain values if I am to survive. All values are individually consumed. All values are individually created. You know, technology, bridges and medicine do not grow on trees. They do not happen automatically. It takes, and what is the source of values? Reason, as I've indicated. So it takes the thought of an individual. There's no collective brain.
Of course.
Every new idea started in the mind of one human being. Ideas come from one mind. There's no collective mind. Therefore, all production ultimately is individual production. All consumption is individual consumption. That bite of the apple I took is only going to be consumed by me. So we have to look at it in terms of the individual. The individual is the creator of all values. The individual is the consumer of all values. And so when we say self-ownership, you know, America was founded on the idea that people have the equal right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, I very much believe in this idea, but to unpack that idea philosophically is crucial. And that's what America really lacked, was the philosophical defense of that approach. And Ayn Rand gives us, again, she is the one who gives us the answer to this. I need freedom in order to use my reason, because reason is my basic tool of survival. To use force, to point a gun at me and say, don't act on your own best judgment, is to negate my basic tool of survival. Slavery is a condition that destroys my ability, for example, just take an extreme example, my ability to act on my own judgment. You'll notice that when you get rid of slavery in all of its forms, when you have a free society, to the degree that America, for example, produced a free society, look at how it liberated the human mind.
Yes.
And the freedom is basically what oxygen is to fire, so freedom is to human progress intellectually. You liberate the human mind so that people can disagree, so that people can have differences, can use their independent individual minds in solving the problem of survival. And so the functioning of reason depends upon freedom. And it requires that you acknowledge the right to the fruits of my own effort. My creative thought, my work is mine. Now I can voluntarily exchange it in a free market with others, but coercion has to be banned. Physical force has to be banned. We have to have a society in which all interaction is voluntary and recognizes the sovereignty of the individual. Without that, we've shut down the very capacity of humans to survive on the individual level or on the social level.
So you made the case for objective morality beautifully, as usual with you. But can you please contrast it with altruism and collectivism, and especially, and I know you can say a lot about that, Christian morality, because it seems like the Western world became more secular and got rid of the metaphysics of God, but kept the ethics of Christianity. And it seems like it's like forgive me for the violent, aggressive description, but it's like some kind of cancer that it's still eating through our ethics system. So can you please speak to that?
Altruism literally means otherism. Otherism. You know, all values are about helping others, serving others, being for others. And indeed, it requires sacrifice. Now, sacrifice isn't paying a high price for a high value. That would be a fair exchange. And if something is valuable enough, I will pay the proper price for it. No, sacrifice means surrendering a value, means giving up, being less well off at the end of the exchange, at the end of the process. So altruism is the doctrine of self-sacrifice. You've got to suffer and give up for the sake of others. And this, of course, is a philosophy, as Ayn Rand described it, of cannibals. And now, Ayn Rand begins her discussion of altruism by saying, what earthly reason could there be for a piece of cake being a value in my neighbor's stomach, but not a value in my stomach? Well, we're all supposed to be engaged in this forced exchange of gifts where, you know, everyone is sacrificing for everyone else. No. You have a right to live your own life. You have a right to pursue the values your life needs. And your creative thought is, and the product of your effort is yours. In the name of life and human survival. That's the way it has to be. Altruism says the opposite. And it's always a mystical. There is no rational reason why that piece of cake is a value in my neighbor's stomach, but not in my stomach. And only mystical justifications have ever been offered for altruism. So you ask yourself, well, then what is the earthly motive? What's really behind altruism? Well, you'll find that where there are people, as Ayn Rand said, demanding self-sacrifice, you'll find on the other side of the curtain someone collecting those sacrifices. Ultimately, you'll find, and look at how totalitarian dictatorship in the 20th century is, again, like a quintessential example of the ethics of altruism in action. The German Volk will have to sacrifice for the fatherland. And if it means sacrificing unto death, if it means surrendering all of your values, that's the price we have to pay for the collective benefit of the German people. And you're just a slave, you see, to our racist view of what an Aryan is. The communists had a slightly more sophisticated, but still a version of altruism, sacrifice. Instead of sacrificing for the nation, for the race, like Hitler demanded, they say you have to sacrifice for the working class. And so we have to impoverish the bourgeoisie in Russia when we take over, and we have to make everyone sacrifice for the working class. But again, to divide people up into classes is another form of collectivism, which subordinates the interests of the individual,
Mm-hmm.
Christianity is perhaps the real, any mystic philosophy will end up like this. But Christianity really expresses it so consistently. This life on earth is really not what it's about. It's this life in this other dimension. And if you can sacrifice this life for your beliefs, you become a Christian martyr. They're some of the most important saints in Christianity are martyrs. They take vows of celibacy and poverty. Jesus said, don't worry about what you eat and what you wear. Submit to the evildoer, turn the other cheek. It's all about sacrifice. So, and St. Paul in one of his letters said, being a slave is a blessing. It's a tremendous mitzvah, even if you have a harsh slave master, mind you, because that's a particularly wonderful opportunity to sacrifice and get your way in, your foot in the door in the kingdom of heaven, in the next life, in the next dimension. So sacrifice this life for the next dimension. Now, even that has a little bit of self-interest still connected to it, because it's your soul that you're ultimately going for. Someone like Kant, who disconnects it, says, no, you have to do your duty regardless of the consequences. He's taking Christian altruism to such an extent that you have no interest, even this fantasy interest, in getting into the next dimension. And for this reason, Ayn Rand believed that she wanted to seize back the word selfishness as the moral virtue that it is. Now, by selfishness, I do not mean whim worship. I do not mean going by the range of the moment, satisfying whatever lust I have, getting high every day and just having as much sex as I possibly can get, going by my emotions. As Hume would say, all of ethics is. No, you have to think long term. You have to think in terms of a lifetime. But life is your goal, and your own life is its purpose. Your happiness is its purpose. Successful life is what ethics should be all about. Ethics should not be, as the Christians say, suffering and sacrifice and becoming a martyr. No, ethics should be about enjoying your life, succeeding, thriving. Now, that sometimes means achieving long-term goals. And to do that, I need to be principled. I need to adhere to ethical principles like honesty and integrity and productiveness and respecting other people's rights. If I want my rights to be respected, if I have the need to be free, to truly thrive and prosper, I need to respect other people's right to thrive and prosper. And there's no conflict of interest. In fact, to the degree that my neighbor is free, I get to take advantage of his productiveness, of his rationality. And so in a free society where force is banned, you'll notice that that's when everyone can get the most. I get the most from you if I live in a free society. And if it's only voluntary exchange, you'll notice when I go to a store and I buy something, I hand the money to the clerk and he hands me the product. He says thank you and I say thank you. It's a win-win. We both perceive ourselves as gaining. It's mutually selfish. Ayn Rand said, properly understood, there are no conflicts between rational people. Indeed, there aren't. Look at in my country, the United States' history. There was in the South slavery, the very opposite of everything that America originally stood for. There was a conflict in the northern states, which had early abandoned slavery, made it illegal. They were thriving, prosperous. Industry and technology was booming. They had a larger population. They had more rich people. And the rich people were richer than the people in the South. Even the slave owners were living in an inferior society. The result of the Civil War was almost inevitable. The North was going to win because they were adhering to the needs of reason, namely freedom. A slave society makes everyone suffer. The slaves suffer much worse, no doubt. But even the masters are going to find that their society collapses. they're not going to have as many rich people in the South. They're not going to, and the rich people aren't going to be as rich because they have, through the whole system, their political system, they've shut down the mind. They've shut down the conditions by which reason operates. And reason is our fundamental tool of survival.
Mhm. James, Nietzsche said that God is dead, and many argue that without God, there can be no morality, that secular man-made ethics led to the genocide and mass murders of the examples you gave in the 20th century. And for example, there is the Encyclopedia of Wars, which is speaking about 1,800 different wars in the last 5,500 years. And according to this book, only about 7% of the total wars and battles are classified as religious. And then, of course, people argue that the bloodiest events, the mass murders of the 20th century, were secular, often done in the name of reason. And they are giving the examples, for example, of the French Revolution and the Jacobites. How do you say it? Jacobins? Jacobins, yes. And for example, they actually worshipped reason. They actually had the statue of reason in the big cathedral in Paris. So all these things and the horrific atrocities are being attributed to reason by those people who claim that. So how do we go about to answer to this fallacy?
There are people who have argued for the totally irrational and had the temerity to call it reason, and they'll usually put a big capital R on it. Someone like Immanuel Kant, for example, was a big advocate of reason, don't you know? Even though he said that knowledge was impossible, even though he said you have to do your duty no matter what. And so reason is used incorrectly by neo-mystics, and let's call them that, these modern neo-mystics. But what is Nazism? What is communism? They are forms of this neo-mysticism. I would even say that there were neo-mystics at the time. We consider Rousseau, is back to nature. That's an assault on civilization. And when a philosopher like Rousseau can have a deep impact, that's not reason. That's the assault on reason. That's a form of neo-mysticism. And so when neo-mysticism rules the day, you are going to have, again, expect an ocean of blood to be spilt. So no, when they say God is the only basis for morality, I have to say, well, which religion has given us a decent morality? They'll often say, look, America is founded on religious ideas, Judaism and Christianity and the Ten Commandments and the principles of Jesus and so forth, that without religious morality, there could be no United States of America. I disagree altogether. The Mosaic Law advocates stoning people to death for blasphemy against the name of Hashem, stoning people to death for sex crimes, stoning people to death. It advocates slavery. It justifies the slavery of non-Jews. I mean, in the year of Jubilee, we released Jewish slaves, but non-Jews can be enslaved. And this is how you have to treat your slaves. Religion has sanctioned these universal, timeless ethics that's supposed to be eternal truths. We have to modify, don't we, as time goes on? Apparently, God didn't get the right ethics correct in the first place. Yeah. And so you'll find justifications for slavery in both the Hebrew Bible and in the Christian Bible. This is not something I'm making up. And so these are the people who are telling us that religion gives us timeless, objective ethics? No. If we have proper ethics, it's been a phenomenon of the Enlightenment. It's been to the extent that we even have proper ethics. It's an actual use of reason, the actual use of reason that says, look, slavery is inimical to human life. It is hostile to human life. Ayn Rand said it even hurts the master. Wonderful image she has from her novel, The Fountainhead, where she says, a leash is only a rope with a noose at both ends. The dictator isn't being selfish. You notice that Stalin and Hitler ended up literal psychotics in their quest for power, in their psychotic quest for power. Now, it was because they had chosen certain values early on in life, values that were hostile to reason. These are mystics. They are neo-mystics. If your orientation is towards reality, if your orientation is toward life, toward human life, then and only then you have a chance of getting correct ethics, a life-oriented ethics that doesn't demand the spilling of oceans of blood. So anytime someone tells me that it's reason and secularism that's demanding this, I have to say, you're not attending to the facts of reality. You're not attending to the objective needs of human life. We've just described how reason and freedom are necessary. If someone tells me that my freedom, there can be no scientific argument against individual freedom and individual rights. No, it's hostile. The whole idea is a form of neo-mysticism in every instance, whether it's Rousseau, whether it's Marx, whether it's Goebbels.
Absolutely.
These people are neo-mystics, hostile to life on Earth. And they're enemies of reason. The Nazis were maybe the most consistent about this, being anti-reason. You've got to notice the emotionalism of Hitler's speeches. Notice the appeals to collectivism and to just tribal groupthink that it involves. And whether it's the crude statements of Nazi racism or the more sophisticated forms of Bolshevik collectivism, these people are mystics. They're not attending to the facts of reality. Notice that Marx was a mystic. As I say, he can claim, I'm a scientific materialist. Oh, yes. Marx will say he's a scientific guy. He rejects the existence of God, just like Nietzsche did. But for him, who was it? I forget who it was. It was a Proudhon or Kropotkin. God is the state is God. And so that's what it becomes. The state becomes God.
That was Hegel, no?
Oh, Hegel absolutely is talk about a mystic, and whose mysticism directly led to a defense of an authoritarian and totalitarian state. And that's, you believe that there's this universal spirit governing everything and that we all must subordinate our interests to the needs of this universal spirit, just as Hegel argued. What you're doing is you're making individual lives no longer matter. But guess what? There is no society, capital S. There's only you and me and her and him. Life is an individual, as I keep coming back to, life is an individual phenomenon. Anything, any political system that's hostile to the individual is ignoring reason, is ignoring the facts of reality, is ignoring the needs of human life on Earth.
I absolutely agree. Objectivism asserts that we are conscious beings with free will, not just atoms in motion, but many materialist and reductionist philosophies argue that free will is an illusion, that we are simply deterministic matter, no different from rocks or machines. How does Objectivism defend free will as an emergent, irreducible faculty? And how does Ayn Rand idea of emanation fit into this? And why does denying free will ultimately destroy the possibility of morality, responsibility, and even knowledge? And finally, do you know how consciousness emerges at the biological level?
Wow, that's a bunch of questions right there. Let's see if I can take them one at a time.
Of course.
If determinism were true, it would destroy morality altogether. And this is something Aristotle understood. Why is it that we don't blame babies morally? Why is it that we don't blame animals morally? Why is it that we don't blame the Earth for spinning on its axis and orbiting about the sun? Because they do not possess free will. It would make no sense to praise or to blame, to credit or to condemn if people didn't have a choice. All those concepts only make sense if I have some faculty of choice, if I could have done otherwise, if I could not have done otherwise, if I was by circumstances compelled to do something. Say a circumstance in which someone does point a gun to my head. To that extent, I have lost moral agency. You're forcing my behavior. I'm not choosing freely. And only to the extent that someone is choosing freely do any normative concepts make any sense whatever. You really should have done, you really ought to do. What we ought to do is, no, none of that makes sense if humans don't have a faculty for choice. People know in a primary way that they have choice from the inside out. The initial validation of free will is that it is introspectively self-evident. Look, I feel thinking takes effort. Thinking, and it's just that basic. Thinking takes effort. I know that I need to push my mind to get it to a higher level of focus and consciousness. It's not going to happen automatically. My most primary choice is my choice to think or not, according to Ayn Rand.
Yes.
Reason does not work automatically. I can choose to be my own destroyer, but that's what opens up actually the potential for creativity. I can choose among the various options. How do I get that? I get that only by adhering to reality. According to Ayn Rand, free will is not some magical faculty. Those religious people who believe in free will tell you that it's some kind of magical causeless phenomenon. And so the scientific reductionists, as you say, they will say, well, wait a minute, no, life is really, the universe is really just like a billiard table where everything is, reacting against each other. No. The mystics say it's magic, and the so-called scientific reductionists say there's no magic, and causality can only work in this one way. Well, free will is not a violation of causality. It's an instance of causality. We choose the
You
reason.
mean it's an attribute?
It's an attribute, exactly.
Mhm.
Look, there are only so many things that an acorn can, as Aristotle said 2,300 years ago, an acorn only has certain potentiality within it. If I plant it and nurture it, it can become an oak tree, or I can mash it up into a meal, I suppose. And Native Americans in my country in California ate acorn mash. I cannot turn it into Hegel. I cannot turn it into a spacecraft. There's only so much. I can't flap my wings and get to the moon. No, free will does not say you can violate causation. What free will says is if you attend to the facts, you'll realize that if you submit to reality and those facts, you could have another option here. If I do it this way, see, we can project with our minds alternate futures. And it is only by using reason that I open up these alternate futures. No, this time I'm going to choose to do that. And this is what the only thing that can explain the range of human creativity, our art, our science, the fact that we can do something so extraordinary as leave the planet and go to the moon, for example. The range of human creative thought is really an astonishing thing. But it's the product of having this capacity for free will. Free will is, again, A is A. There is no causeless action at all. But it's an instance of causation. I am selecting among the choices that I have of different behaviors. I could go to the store and buy my food for the week, or I could work on some writing project that I have. We have those choices. Those choices emanate from my capacity for thought. And my most fundamental choice is to activate my thought or not. And it has to be free will. Otherwise, I wouldn't have those kind of options, that kind of flexibility. It's a part of the operation of reason. So for Ayn Rand, free will and reason at the conceptual level are really the same phenomenon. The operation of reason and our free will are the same thing. Now, it is extraordinary to me that these scientific determinist types have to recognize that it is an obvious thing. It's an observation we all make. They call it the illusion of free will. So they can't get around the fact that everyone can see and everyone feels as if they're choosing when they're conscious and awake on the conceptual level. We're making choices all the time. They call that the illusion of free will. But wait a minute, you're telling me that you couldn't construct some device which has more than one alternative action? No, there are multiple potentials. Now, those potentials are limited to the facts of reality. As I say, an acorn has a specific nature, and you can only do certain things with an acorn. And those things that you can do with it are already latent in the potential that an acorn has. We'll smash it up into meal or plant it and turn it into an oak tree. It will not, however much I wish, hope, and whatever my choices are, turn it into the philosopher Hegel. An acorn will not turn into the philosopher Hegel. And so it's not a violation of the law of cause and effect by free will. No, it's an application of the law of cause and effect. My mind operates by a specific means. I have to choose. You say, well, causation demands a certain kind of action. Yes, the nature of our consciousness demands a certain kind of action. Choosing to think or not, choosing to think about this or to think about that or not. So the action that we're determined to do is choose. But choice is an action. an action that my nature as a human consciousness makes possible.
Fantastic. James, how does Objectivism view the role of art and beauty in human life, and why is it considered essential, not optional, for rational and flourishing existence? And also, how do we answer again to those who say that we must have a transcendental source to account for beauty?
Wow. If the standard in epistemology is what is true, if the standard in ethics is what is good, Ayn Rand says the standard in aesthetics, in the theory of art, in our reaction to beauty, what is important? What is important? Let me break that down a little bit. Again, it relates to the nature of human consciousness. We are not simply creatures of sense perception. We're conceptual beings. Each of my concepts, and this is how human consciousness works on the epistemological level. There's an intimate connection between human epistemology and aesthetics in this sense. A concept is a grouping of perceived entities. And so I see that thing, that thing, that thing. Oh, that's a ball. This thing, that's a cup. That thing, that's a chair. And so the concept chair or ball represents an open-ended number of chairs and balls. Every chair that has ever existed, every chair that will ever exist, and all the chairs I've never seen that currently exist on this planet are subsumed by the concept chair. So it's not a direct observation. It's an integration of observations. I see enough chairs and I abstract what they have in common and I group them together into the same concept, chair. Now, on the level of the things I'm conceptualizing perceptually, it's actually relatively simple. Table, chair, human being, tree, dog. But as I move up the ladder of abstraction, it becomes easier for me to disconnect myself from the facts that they actually subsume and represent. But a valid concept is simply subsuming the facts of reality that I observe. Ultimately, no matter how high my abstract concept, I have to be able to reduce it to the facts of observation, or it's an invalid concept, like ghost or unicorn or magical elf. There is no referent in reality. Those are anti-concepts, according to Ayn Rand. Now,
that's what Kant did, right? He detached us from the reality.
Precisely
so our
correct.
Concepts are whatever we want them to be, and we create reality with our mind.
It's the nature of our consciousness that imposes concepts onto the world. You see, or in ethics, he says, do your duty regardless of the consequences. He severed values from the needs of life. In Ayn Rand's view, Kant was the absolute worst of all philosophers because he both destroyed the capacity for us to know and, according to his philosophy, and he severed values from the needs of human life.
And he said that he has to give reason away for faith eventually. He tried to protect faith, right?
Ultimately, we need faith. Ultimately, we need some non-rational means of knowing. If you press this point consistently, they have to be mystics. Now, being a conceptual being, though, means that my highest values, life, well, that's quite an abstraction. Happiness, that's quite an abstract. Rights, we were talking about, that's quite a high abstraction. And that requires a lot of conceptual thinking. Now, to experience something, I want to experience my cup of coffee, I just pick it up and take a sip. But if I want to experience and feel the reality of my high abstractions, I need something like art. Art, according to Ayn Rand, is a stylized concrete, a concrete so designed by the artist as to evoke the conceptual, the highly abstract, so that I can experience a highly abstract thing concretely and emotionally. And it keeps me in contact with my values. And so if I were just to go along in life with high theoretical abstractions, it would be a barren world in which I'm really not motivated. In order for me to emotionally experience my highest values, which are high abstractions conceptually. So for a conceptual being, you'll notice no other animal needs art. We alone, humans, compose symphonies and operas, paint, paintings, write novels, need stories. And what are these art forms doing for us? They're concretizing our high abstract values in order so that we, as a conceptual being, can experience them emotionally. You can see this in a very simple way with symbols. The flag of your country goes up and people get emotional. A tear may come down. If you fought in wars for your country, you see the flag of your country, you have a profound emotion. You've lost brothers and sisters maybe on the battlefield. You knew the values you were fighting for. And so this symbol, a flag, a piece of cloth, with certain color configurations on this piece of cloth, can make me have a profound emotional reaction. A tear will come down the veteran's cheek as he just looks at the flag being raised, because he knows all the things he knows about what was fought and the price we had to pay to achieve, say, a nation as wonderful as Israel, an island of civilization in a sea of savagery. I mean, Israelis have every right to get emotional just at the sight of an Israeli flag. Why? Because that concrete, for a conceptual being, that concrete representation of what Israel represents is a way for me to directly experience all of the concretes that the concept of Israel subsumes. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Wow, thank you very much. But how do you settle, for example, the fact that all the greatest composers, especially in the Baroque time, composers like Bach, of course, they came from a Christian background, a Lutheran background. They were supported and paid by the church, and yet they created maybe the most beautiful music ever. So
it is an accident. Well, not entirely an accident, but just because the Enlightenment happened in Christian Europe, and it was Europeans, Christians and Jews, and you're right, Protestants mostly, but also Catholics, went through this Enlightenment. It's not the Christianity that gave us the Enlightenment. But you say to me, why is it that this great music is inspired by religion? Well, because it's their abstract values. It's their highest values. You'll notice religious ceremony always involves art of some kind. And it involves getting together perhaps to sing a song. So we get everyone on the same emotional page. But what is the art doing? It is actually a way for the Handel, when he writes the oratorio Messiah, he's giving Christians a way to experience their highest values, their highest abstractions, the thing that is most important to them. Now, to simply invent the violin was a product of a society that was earthly, earth-oriented. The discovery all the way back when a legend says Pythagoras gave us the Western harmonies. But to discover those mathematical relationships between sound was an achievement of reason. To develop the form of the symphony or the opera itself is a product of reason. And so the greatest art will come from times that, whether it's the ancient Greeks in their sculpture and architecture, whether it's in the Renaissance. Now, those people were Catholics, right? Living in Italy. Well, it wasn't the Catholicism. That's what gave us the Dark Ages that had preceded the Renaissance. By the time of the Renaissance, they were, what does Renaissance mean? The rebirth. They were, Greek ideas were now being introduced. Reason now had a foothold. Humanism, the value of human life, now had a foothold. You look at someone like Da Vinci, he was in love with observation. He was in love with perspective. He was in love with this world. So instead of the Dark Age, two-dimensional baby Jesuses that need a beard, and are always religious, notice what the Renaissance did. Personal portraits like the Mona Lisa, portraits of individual human beings, or the humanistic poetry of a Petrarch or Boccaccio, the great Italian poets of the 15th century. The unusual thing there is not religion. Had been there for centuries. The new thing there is the orientation to this world, the respect for reason, the respect for human life. The Renaissance is about this world. And that's what would eventually lead to the scientific revolution and to the great achievements of Enlightenment art, such as the great composers and the development of modern music. No, those are products of reason. Those are products of an earthly orientation. So I abstract away and I say, well, look, there are these people who are these scientists and these artists who are Christian. That is, by comparison, accidental. What they're really expressing is something new in Christian history, not the mysticism that had dominated for centuries, the centuries we call the Dark and Middle Ages. You
Mhm.
know, the Middle Ages was actually still a struggle to reestablish Aristotelian logic on the scene. But once it got its foot in the door, boom, opens up the Renaissance, because they're focused now on reality. They're observing the world as it is. They're using their reason as it is. They're concerned about life of individual humans on this earth. And that is what led to the great explosion. It just happened to be Christian society that did that. But I would notice that in Europe, it was also Jews within Europe that were experiencing an enlightenment. And it was the effect of it, whether it's the pantheist Spinoza or even Reformed Judaism developing under Moses Mendelssohn. What you're seeing here is not the same old religion. The new twist here is what's interesting. It's an orientation toward reason, the value of individual life, the impact of Greek philosophy, especially that of Aristotle. That's what you're seeing in the Enlightenment. And that's what made European culture so special. It's not a racial thing. It's not because they were Caucasian Europeans. It was because of the ideas that dominated their culture, ideas that were promoted reason, ideas that promoted human life on earth.
So
That's what has given us
so
the
it's
great achievement.
basically despite Christianity, it's basically the Renaissance, the rediscovery of classic Greece, taming Christianity.
Precisely.
Mhm. I understand. Wow. And what would you say? I don't know if you will agree, but much of the mainstream music and culture today seems to me to be simply ugly, and like I would even go and say there is decadence. What can we learn from the? If you agree with that, what can
I
we
do.
learn from the state of of culture today, of beauty today, on how it informs the philosophy that is ruling the day?
Well, you see, the Enlightenment came under attack. It came under attack by philosophers who wanted to reestablish, in effect, a Christian worldview. Men like Immanuel Kant. Hegel was a theologian as much as a philosopher himself. Men like Kant and Hegel pounded away at the Renaissance, at the Enlightenment and the
Enlightenment.
Renaissance that had made it possible, if you will. They have taken us back to a time when it's the mystic dogmatists versus the skeptical subjectivists, and that is what we see in rearing its ugly head again. Ideas control history; they really do. The ideas that people accept will shape its art, shape its culture, shape its science, and so unfortunately, this neo-mysticism, the same neo-mysticism that gave us 20th century totalitarianism, that same neo-mysticism is corrupting the arts. And the art is, then there's a feedback loop effect. That same, there's anti-reason, anti-life art, music, novels without plots, music without melody, an assault, in effect, on the art forms themselves are what we're hearing. And so, yes, I happen to agree with you that we're reverting back into a primordial time that unfortunately controlled most of human history before reason was dominant, before the Enlightenment. It was the Enlightenment, the Industrial Revolution, there's the technological revolution of the last 200 or 300 years that has made the huge difference in in the well-being of human beings, in our life expectancy, in the medicine we have, and the choices of entertainment that we have. Unfortunately, there's been a counter movement, a counter revolution to the revolution that was the Enlightenment. And so much of our current culture, so much of the current art in Western culture is a product of either this rank emotional subjectivism or this dogmatic religious mysticism. And those are that's the false alternative that we're given. Either you go back to this conservative art, and so they'll take us back as far as you're conservative, culturally speaking. Your conservative wants to take us back to the Middle Ages, and your leftist today wants us to go back to the Stone Age in their love of primitivism and just mindless drum chanting and folk dance. That's considered the progressive left today. They're actually advocating something still more primordial, mind you, than the religious conservative. But they both, in effect, are rejecting the Enlightenment. They're both rejecting the civilization that only reason could produce in the last few centuries.
There are many new age movements today which are again very mystical. It's all about their emotions, their gut feeling, their intuition, and again it's like a modern variation of the old religion, only that this time they are not bound by the god there in the sky. They become their own gods.
Precisely correct. Precisely. Well, look at Nietzsche. Nietzsche's a great example of just the guy you quoted, God is dead. God, he was recognizing that the idea of God was losing its hold on the European mind. It's true. It was. Science, it was really blowing away, in so many ways, traditional religious thought. He recognized that. But his response was total subjectivism, total what he called the Dionysus side, the emotionalism, wallowing in effect in your emotions as a theory of art. Nietzsche was in effect the first hippie in that sense. Nietzsche was in effect saying that's what art is. It's detached from reason. It's the liberation from reason and reality. Well, that's just rank subjectivism, the other side of that false alternative in the philosophical coin. This is why the world so desperately needs Ayn Rand. If we're going to defend individual rights and political freedom, if we're going to defend science, if we're going to defend the great achievements of Western art at its height, what we need is to discover for the first time the power of philosophy and the need of philosophy in our lives, and to have an objective, rational philosophy. Only that can save our culture, scientifically, artistically, politically.
Yes. Before we close, and in preparation for our next conversation, could you give us a little teaser of your fascinating work, Creating Christ? What's the core message of the book, and what do you hope readers take away from it? Let's call it an appetizer for next time, hopefully.
Okay. Well, it occurred to me some 40 years ago now that the great Jewish wars, the great Jewish rebellions against the Roman Empire that reduced the temple to the Wailing Wall that it is today, the war in 70 AD, CE, I should probably say, of the modern era, that the Jewish wars, and there was a second, of course, Messianic Jewish war in the 2nd century under Bar Kokhba. Those Jewish wars were happening at the very moment that Christianity was coming into existence. And so I stopped and I thought to myself, can that be accidental? Can a pacifist, altruist form of Jewish messianic thought have emerged in Greek at the very same time as the messianic Jewish wars of the 1st and 2nd centuries? I do not think that that was a mere coincidence. I think that there is an intimate relationship. And let me give you the conclusory bottom line. Christianity may be seen as a critical reaction to Jewish messianic nationalism of the 1st and 2nd centuries. The Greco-Roman response, the cultural response, there was a military response that crushed the Jews in a brutal, brutal way. Tens of thousands of Jews were slaughtered, crucified. The Jews were enslaved in the tens of thousands. It was a brutal war, as ancient war was. But the philosophical response by the Greco-Roman world to Jewish messianism was Christianity.
It blew my mind when I saw the movie and started to read the book. Unbelievable, seriously.
Thank you.
It's literally like a political warfare, basically like changing the essence of the nationalistic Jews into something which is the opposite of everything that they stand for.
Precisely right. You'll notice what we were saying about altruism, and Christianity represents an extreme form of altruism. Turn the other cheek, submit to the evildoer, pay your taxes, submit
Romans chapter 13 is wow, what is that? It's like
right.
completely surrender to Caesar.
It is exactly it. This whole idea, render unto Caesar, or submit to the evildoer, or turn the other cheek. That extreme form of altruism, you see, has to have a mystical basis. But the real motive is political power here on earth. Where there's someone demanding sacrifice, there's someone collecting it, telling you, oh, it's a good thing to be a Roman slave.
It's never
in the
good
wake
to be
of the
a slave.
Jewish war.
Yeah. James, where can people find you and your incredible work?
Well, thank you very much for the compliment. I'm a regular on the podcasts for the Ayn Rand Center United Kingdom, Ayn Rand Center UK, where for members, subscribers, I do seminars on the works of Ayn Rand, the lectures of Leonard Peikoff, her heir, and we study Objectivism, the philosophy of Ayn Rand there, and we apply it to current events. Currently, we are focused on what's going on in the Middle East today. That is the front line in the battle of civilization. And so we focus a great deal. Just this morning, for example, on a podcast talking about the situation in Gaza. I can also be found on social media. I'm a frequent, almost every day I'm at Facebook answering questions. And I'll frequently appear on the podcast by a friend of mine, Michael Leibowitz, The Rational Egoist.
Yeah, fantastic podcast, really highly recommended.
Thank
So,
you.
James, from the bottom of my heart, thank you. It's been an absolute honor having you on the show today. Your clarity, your insights, and the depth of your thinking are truly inspiring. I'm so grateful for your time and for sharing your wisdom with us. And I hope we can continue this conversation again.
Well, thank you. I hope so too. This has been fun.
Thank you very much. So with your permission, I will end the recording and I will send you, of course, a link to the video so you can perhaps use it.
I will share it. Thank you.
Thank you.